I needed this job. Simple as that. My savings account had exactly $43 and some change, and rent was due in 5 days. When the Craigslist ad said, overnight maintenance, Wildwood Amusement Park, $22 an hour, I didn't ask too many questions. $22 an hour was more than I'd made at any job since moving to Missouri. The park sat about 15 miles outside town, down a 2-lane road that wound through thick woods. I'd driven past it a few times during the day, one of those small family operations that probably did decent business in summer, but looked pretty dead this time of year. October nights in Missouri got cold fast, and most people weren't thinking about carnival rides when frost was forming on their windshields. My Civic's headlights swept across the entrance as I pulled into the gravel parking lot. The main gate was chained shut, but there was a smaller employee entrance to the left with a hand-painted sign that said, "Staff only." The whole place looked different at night. During the day, even closed, it had that cheerful, abandoned feeling of a carnival between seasons. Now it just looked empty. I parked near the entrance and checked my watch. 7:55 p.m. Walter Schmidt, the guy who'd hired me over the phone, had said to meet him at the main office at 8 sharp. His voice had been gruff, no nonsense, like he'd been doing this job since before I was born. The employee gate wasn't locked. I pushed through and found myself on a narrow path that led between game booths and food stands. Everything was shut down tight. Metal security gates pulled down over the ring toss games, tarps covering the funnel cake stand. The path was lit by a few scattered security lights that cast long shadows between the attractions. The main office turned out to be a small building near the center of the park, tucked between the Tilt-A-Whirl and something called the Scrambler. It was one of those prefab structures that looked like it had been dropped there in the 80s and never updated. Fake wood paneling, narrow windows, a door that had been painted so many times you could see the layers peeling at the edges. Walter Schmidt was waiting for me on the front steps. He looked exactly like he'd sounded on the phone. Stocky build, maybe 5'7", with graying brown hair and the kind of weathered face you get from working outdoors for decades. He wore a faded park supervisor jacket and had a ring of keys hanging from his belt that looked like it could unlock half the county. "You're Morrison," he said. It wasn't a question. Alexander Harrison, actually. Morrison's my middle name. I'd used it on the application because my real name was tied to some credit issues I didn't want to explain. Walter's eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Right, you ready to get started?" "Sure thing. What exactly will I be doing?" He turned and unlocked the office door. "Maintenance. Checking the perimeter, securing equipment, basic upkeep. Nothing complicated." The office was small and cramped, with a metal desk, a couple of filing cabinets, and a coffee maker that looked older than me. The walls were covered with park maps, maintenance schedules, and safety notices. A window faced out toward the carousel, which sat dark and still about 50 yards away. Walter walked to the desk and picked up a laminated sheet of paper. "Before we go over your duties, you need to read this." He handed me the sheet. At the top, in bold letters, it said, "Overnight shift rules. Follow exactly." Below that were 5 numbered items. 1. Do not enter the woods surrounding the park between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. Stay within the park boundaries at all times during these hours. 2. Between 2 a.m. and 2:15 a.m., do not approach the carousel. Remain in the office and do not look directly at the ride during this time. 3. If a man knocks on the office window at 3 a.m., do not acknowledge him. Do not open the window or door. Continue your work and ignore him completely. 4. At 4 a.m., close all office blinds and do not look outside until 4:30 a.m. If you see lights moving in the woods, do not investigate. 5. If a child enters the office claiming to be lost, immediately call 911. Do not let the child leave until police arrive. I read through the list twice, then looked up at Walter. Is this some kind of joke? His expression didn't change. Do I look like I'm joking? These rules are... I searched for the right word. They're bizarre. What's this about someone knocking on the window at 3 a.m.? And why would a lost child be here in the middle of the night? Walter took the sheet back and placed it on the desk. The rules keep you safe. That's all you need to know. Safe from what? From making the same mistakes other employees made. He walked to the filing cabinet and pulled out a clipboard. We've had some incidents over the years. People who didn't follow the rules exactly. What kind of incidents? Walter's jaw tightened. The kind where we had to hire new employees. The way he said it made my stomach drop. Are you saying people died? I'm saying people who follow the rules go home in the morning. People who don't. He shrugged. Well, we don't have that problem anymore because now we have rules. I stared at the laminated sheet. The rules were typed in a simple font, nothing fancy, but something about seeing them laid out so matter-of-factly made them feel more real, more serious. Look, I said, I need this job, but I also need to understand what I'm getting into. Can you at least tell me why these specific rules exist? Walter was already heading for the door. Your shift starts at 8. I'll be back at 6 a.m. to relieve you. The maintenance checklist is on the desk, along with keys to the equipment sheds. Radio's there if you need to call for help, but cell service is spotty out here. Walter, wait. He paused at the door, but didn't turn around. The rules aren't suggestions, Morrison. They're not guidelines. They're the difference between going home to your family and becoming another incident report. Now he did turn, and his brown eyes finally met mine. You follow them exactly, or you find another job. Those are your options. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone in the office. I picked up the laminated sheet again and read through the rules a third time. Each one seemed more insane than the last. Don't enter the woods after 1 a.m. Okay, that could be a safety thing. Wild animals maybe, or unstable ground. But don't look at the carousel between 2 and 2:15. Ignore someone knocking on the window at exactly 3 a.m. Close the blinds at 4 and don't look at lights in the woods. It sounded like something out of a horror movie. The kind of job where the new guy gets killed in the first act because he doesn't take the warning seriously. But Walter's tone hadn't been that of someone playing a prank or trying to scare the new employee. He'd sounded like a man who'd seen things he didn't want to talk about, like someone who'd learned these rules the hard way. I sat down at the desk and looked out the window toward the carousel. It was a classic merry-go-round, maybe 40 feet across, with painted horses frozen in mid-gallop. During the day, it probably looked cheerful and inviting. Right now, with just the security lights casting shadows between the horses, it looked like something from a nightmare. My watch read 8:15. Walter was gone, probably driving back to town, leaving me alone with a list of rules that made no sense and a growing feeling that I just made a terrible mistake. But I needed the money. $43 wouldn't cover rent, and jobs that paid $22 an hour didn't grow on trees in rural Missouri. Whatever was going on here, I could handle one night. Follow the rules, do the maintenance work, collect my paycheck. I folded the rule sheet and put it in my shirt pocket, then picked up the maintenance checklist. Standard stuff. Check the perimeter fence, secure any loose equipment, clean the walkways, basic upkeep on the rides. Normal work for a normal job, except for the 5 rules that suggested this was anything but normal. I stood up and grabbed the keys from the desk. The sooner I got started on the maintenance work, the sooner the night would be over. And maybe, if I was lucky, nothing would happen that would make me understand why those rules existed in the first place. The office felt smaller now that I was alone. The window facing the carousel seemed bigger, more prominent, like it was watching me as much as I was watching it. I pulled the maintenance checklist closer and tried to focus on the work ahead. Outside, the October wind picked up, rattling the office windows and making the security lights sway on their poles. The shadows between the carnival rides shifted and moved, creating the illusion of movement where there shouldn't be any. I checked my watch again. 8:20 p.m. 9 hours and 40 minutes until Walter came back. 9 hours and 40 minutes to follow 5 simple rules and pretend this was just another maintenance job. I grabbed the maintenance checklist from the desk and headed outside, the cool October air hitting my face as I stepped into the park. The security lights cast long shadows between the rides, making everything look different than it had during my brief walk to the office. I pulled out my phone to check the time, 8:20 p.m. Plenty of time to get through the basic tasks before things got weird. The perimeter fence was my first stop. I walked the outer edge of the park, checking for loose posts or damaged sections. The chain link stretched about 8 feet high, topped with 3 strands of barbed wire that looked newer than the rest of the fencing. Every 50 yards or so, I found metal signs bolted to the posts. No trespassing. Wildwood Amusement Park. Violators will be prosecuted. The paint was faded, but the message was clear enough. Most of the fence looked solid, but I found a section near the back where a tree had fallen during some storm and bent the top rail. The chain link sagged, but hadn't torn. I made a note on the checklist and kept moving. The woods pressed close to the fence line here, thick enough that I couldn't see more than 20 feet into the trees. Something about the darkness between those trunks made me walk a little faster. The equipment shed sat behind the tilt-a-whirl, a metal building about the size of a 2-car garage. Walter's keys worked on the first try, and I flipped the light switch to reveal shelves lined with tools, cleaning supplies, and spare parts for the rides. Everything looked organized. Wrenches hung on pegboards, buckets stacked neatly, coils of electrical wire sorted by gauge. I grabbed a push broom and a bucket of cleaning solution, then locked the shed back up. The walkways needed attention. Leaves had blown in from the surrounding trees, collecting in corners and around the base of the rides. I swept the main paths first, the wide concrete strips that connected the entrance to the center of the park. The broom scraped against the pavement, the sound echoing off the silent rides. Every few minutes I'd stop and listen, but all I heard was wind moving through the trees and the distant hum of the security lights. The scrambler had loose safety chains hanging from 2 of the cars. I climbed up on the platform and secured them to their proper positions, checking that the latches worked smoothly. The metal was cold under my hands, and the whole ride creaked slightly when I put my weight on it. I tested each car's restraint system, making sure nothing would come loose if the ride was running. The tilt-a-whirl needed similar attention. 3 of the spinning cars had trash blown into them. Candy wrappers, a plastic cup, some napkins that had probably been there since the park closed for the season. I cleaned them out and checked the safety belts. One had a frayed edge that I noted on the checklist for replacement. By 10:30, I'd worked my way through most of the basic maintenance tasks. The park felt different now that I'd been walking around it for over 2 hours. Less threatening, more like what it actually was, a collection of aging carnival rides and game booths that needed constant upkeep. I was starting to think maybe the rules were just Walter's way of messing with new employees. I headed back to the office and made myself a cup of coffee with the ancient machine on the filing cabinet. The coffee tasted like it had been sitting in the pot since the Carter administration, but it was hot and had caffeine. I settled into the desk chair and worked on some paperwork. Inventory sheets for cleaning supplies, a maintenance log that needed updating, a stack of safety inspection forms. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward midnight. I found myself checking it more often as the night wore on, thinking about those rules folded in my shirt pocket. At 11:45, I pulled them out and read through them again. The first rule was clear enough. Stay out of the woods between 1 and 5 a.m. That seemed reasonable. Woods at night could be dangerous. Uneven ground, low branches, maybe wild animals. At 12:50, I put down my pen and watched the clock. 5 minutes until 1 a.m. 4 minutes. 3. I could feel my heart beating a little faster, which was stupid. Nothing was going to happen. This was just an old amusement park in the middle of nowhere. The minute hand clicked to 12. 1 a.m. exactly. Something crashed through the trees beyond the fence. I sat up straight, coffee mug halfway to my lips. The sound came from deep in the woods, maybe 100 yards out. Heavy, like a large animal moving fast through underbrush, branches snapping, leaves rustling. Then silence. I set the mug down carefully and listened. Nothing for maybe 30 seconds. Then another crash, closer this time. Whatever was out there was big. Bigger than a deer or even a bear. The sounds moved parallel to the fence line, heading toward the back of the park. My hands were shaking slightly as I picked up my pen and tried to focus on the paperwork. Just an animal. Had to be. Maybe a fallen tree that was still settling. The woods were full of normal explanations for strange sounds. Another crash. This one close enough that I could hear individual branches breaking. Something was definitely moving out there, and it was following the perimeter of the park. I forced myself to keep writing, filling out a supply order form that probably didn't need to be done until morning. The sounds continued for the next 20 minutes. Sometimes close, sometimes distant, but always moving. Always just beyond the fence in those dark trees. I didn't look toward the windows. I kept my eyes on the paperwork and tried to ignore the way my shoulders tensed every time something crashed through the underbrush. At 1:20, the sounds stopped completely. The silence felt heavier than the noise had been. I waited another 10 minutes before I allowed myself to relax, and even then, I kept glancing toward the windows. By 1:45, I was thinking about the second rule. Don't approach the carousel between 2 and 2:15. Don't look directly at it. I could see the ride through the office window, a classic merry-go-round with painted horses and mirrors that reflected the security lights. It looked completely normal, just another piece of carnival equipment sitting silent in the dark. I positioned myself at the desk where I could see the carousel clearly but still work on paperwork. The clock showed 1:58, 1:59, 2 a.m. The carousel's lights came on, not the security lights that had been illuminating it all night. These were the ride's own lights, colored bulbs strung around the canopy, mirrors that caught and reflected the glow, painted details on the horses that suddenly stood out in bright relief. The whole thing lit up like it was ready for customers. Then it started to turn. Slowly at first, just a gentle rotation that made the horses rise and fall on their brass poles. The calliope music wasn't playing, but I could almost hear it anyway. That tinny, mechanical melody that all carousels seem to use. The painted horses moved up and down, around and around, their glass eyes catching the light. There was someone standing among the horses. I caught the movement in my peripheral vision and almost looked directly at the ride before I remembered the rule. Don't look directly at it. I forced my eyes back to the paperwork, but I could still see the figure in the edge of my vision. Tall, wearing dark clothes, standing perfectly still while the carousel turned around it. The horses rose and fell, the mirrors flashed, but the figure never moved. My hands were shaking again. I gripped the pen tighter and tried to focus on the supply order, but the words kept blurring together. The carousel kept turning, that slow, hypnotic rotation that seemed to pull at the corner of my eye. I wanted to look. Part of me needed to see what was standing out there among the horses. I didn't look. The minutes crawled by. 2:05, 2:08, 2:12. The carousel kept turning, and the figure kept standing there, motionless in the center of all that movement. I filled out 3 more forms and tried to ignore the way my skin felt like it was crawling. At exactly 2:15, the carousel stopped. The lights went out all at once, plunging the ride back into the dim glow of the security lighting. I waited another full minute before I allowed myself to look directly at it. The carousel sat silent and empty, just painted horses on brass poles. No figure, no movement. Just another piece of carnival equipment that hadn't run in months. I set down my pen and flexed my fingers, realizing I'd been gripping it hard enough to leave marks on my palm. 2 rules down, 3 to go. And I was starting to understand that Walter hadn't been messing with me at all. I checked my watch. 2:48 a.m. 2 minutes until the next rule kicked in. I'd made it through the carousel incident without looking directly at whatever that figure was, and now I had to prepare for Rule 3. The man at the window. I got up from the desk and walked to each window in the office. There were 4 of them, one facing the carousel, one on each side wall, and one behind the desk that looked toward the equipment shed. I pulled the curtains closed on 3 of them, leaving just a small gap in the one facing the carousel so I could still see outside if I needed to. My hands were steadier now than they'd been during the carousel thing. Maybe I was getting used to this, or maybe the adrenaline was wearing off. Either way, I felt more in control as I settled back at the desk with my paperwork. 2:59 a.m. I picked up my pen and focused on the supply order form in front of me. Cleaning solution, trash bags, replacement safety equipment, normal stuff. I wrote down quantities and part numbers, keeping my eyes on the paper. The knocking started at exactly 3:00 a.m. 3 sharp raps on the window behind me, the one that faced the equipment shed. I didn't turn around. I kept writing, filling in the form like nothing was happening. Knock, knock, knock. More insistent this time. I could hear it clearly, but I forced myself to keep working. The pen felt slippery in my hand, but I managed to write down industrial floor cleaner, 2 gallons, in neat handwriting. Then I heard a voice, muffled through the glass, but clear enough. Hey, you in there? I didn't respond. Rule 3 was specific, don't acknowledge. I turned the page on my clipboard and started filling out a maintenance request form for the frayed safety belt I'd found on the tilt-a-whirl. The knocking got louder, more urgent. I can see you in there. Open up. I wrote down, scrambler car number 3, safety belt replacement needed, and checked the box for priority repair. My handwriting was getting a little shaky, but it was still legible. The voice changed tactics. Look, I work here too. I'm maintenance staff. I got locked out of the equipment shed and I need to get my tools. That made me pause for just a second. The voice sounded normal, reasonable, like a guy who really did work here and really was having a problem. But Walter's warning echoed in my head. Follow the rules exactly. I kept writing. Tilt-a-whirl car, number 7, safety belt frayed, needs immediate replacement. Come on, man, just look at me. I'm wearing the uniform and everything. The knocking turned into pounding, harder, more desperate. I can see you sitting right there. Why won't you help me? I finished the maintenance form and flipped to a new page. Equipment inventory. I started listing everything I'd seen in the shed earlier. Push brooms, cleaning solutions, safety equipment, spare parts. The pounding stopped suddenly. For about 30 seconds, there was complete silence. Then it started again, but different. Rhythmic, like someone was trying to break the glass. Bang, bang, bang. I gripped my pen tighter and kept writing. Safety chains, 12 units, various lengths. The sound was getting louder, more violent, like whoever was out there was hitting the window with something heavy. Let me in! Let me in! Let me in! The voice was getting higher, more frantic, less human somehow. But I didn't turn around. I didn't even look toward the window. I just kept filling out forms like it was the most important thing in the world. The banging continued for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few minutes. Then it moved. I could hear it traveling around the building, first to the side window, then to the front, then to the other side. At each window, the same pattern. Knocking, then pleading, then angry, pounding. At the front window, the voice tried a different approach. I know you can hear me. I know you're following those stupid rules, but I'm not what you think I am. I'm just trying to do my job. I started a new form, safety inspection checklist. I went through each ride systematically, noting what I'd checked and what needed attention. Those rules aren't protecting you. They're protecting something else, something that doesn't want you to know the truth. The voice was right outside the front window now, maybe 3 feet from where I sat. I could hear breathing through the glass. "If you just look at me, you'll see I'm telling the truth. I'm wearing the same uniform you are. I have the same keys Walter gave you." That got my attention, but I forced myself to keep writing. How could he know about Walter? About the keys? I've been trying to warn people for months. Every night someone new comes to work here, and every night they follow those rules like sheep. But the rules aren't keeping you safe. They're keeping you ignorant. I finished the safety checklist and moved on to a supply request form. My hands were shaking again, but I kept writing. "Look at me, just once. See for yourself." The pleading in the voice was almost heartbreaking. It sounded so genuine, so desperate, like someone who really was trying to help. But Walter's words kept echoing. "Follow the rules exactly. They're the difference between going home to your family and becoming another incident report." I checked my watch. 3:18 a.m., almost over. The knocking stopped. The voice went quiet. For a moment I thought maybe it was done. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, walking around the building again. But this time they didn't stop at the windows. They just kept circling, around and around the office, like someone pacing. 3:20 a.m. The footsteps stopped. Complete silence. I sat there for another minute, pen poised over the paper, waiting. But nothing happened. Whatever had been out there was gone. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and set down my pen. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and my hands were cramping from gripping the pen so tight. But I'd done it. I'd followed Rule 3 exactly. I hadn't acknowledged the man, hadn't opened the window or door, hadn't even looked in his direction. I checked my watch again. 3:22 a.m. 38 minutes until the next rule kicked in. I spent the next half hour organizing the paperwork I'd completed and reviewing the maintenance checklist. Everything was in order. The forms were filled out properly, the inventory was accurate, and all the safety issues were documented. At 3:55 a.m., I started preparing for Rule 4. Close all blinds at 4 a.m. Don't look outside until 4:30 a.m. Don't investigate lights in the woods. I walked to each window and checked the curtains. 3 were already closed from earlier. The 4th, the one with the small gap I'd left open, I'd need to close completely in 5 minutes. 3:59 a.m. I stood by the carousel window, my hand on the curtain. Through the gap, I could see the security lights casting their usual harsh glow over the empty rides. Everything looked normal. 4:00 a.m. I pulled the curtain shut, eliminating the last bit of outside visibility. The office was now completely sealed off from the outside world, and that's when I saw the first light. It was just a faint glow seeping through a tiny gap where the curtain didn't quite meet the window frame. Soft, pulsing light that definitely wasn't from the security system. I forced myself to step away from the window and sit back down at the desk. Don't investigate lights in the woods. The rule was clear. But the light was getting brighter. I could see it even with the curtains closed. A gentle, blue-white glow that seemed to pulse with a rhythm like a heartbeat. More lights appeared. I could tell because the glow was coming from multiple directions now. Not just the woods, but from different areas around the park. They pulsed in sequence like some kind of pattern or signal. I picked up my pen and tried to focus on the paperwork, but it was impossible to ignore what was happening outside. The lights were moving. I could see their glow shifting position, traveling through the park in slow, deliberate patterns. One of them was getting closer to the office. The blue-white glow was getting stronger, seeping through gaps in all the curtains now. It pulsed faster as it approached, and I could hear something else, a low humming sound, almost musical. The light stopped right outside the front window. The humming got louder, more complex. It wasn't just one tone anymore, but multiple harmonies weaving together in patterns that seemed almost familiar, like a song I'd heard before but couldn't quite remember. I gripped my pen and stared at the paperwork, but the music was hypnotic. It made me want to look, to see what was creating such beautiful sounds. My hand moved toward the curtain almost without my permission. I caught myself and pulled my hand back. Don't investigate. Don't look outside. The light pulsed brighter, and the music got more insistent. Other lights were approaching now. I could see their glow through curtains on the other windows. They surrounded the office, each one humming its own harmony, creating a symphony that made my chest ache with longing. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard, and I couldn't look at it. The light stayed for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. They pulsed and sang and moved in patterns around the office, sometimes coming close enough that the walls themselves seemed to glow. The music rose and fell in waves, sometimes soft and gentle, sometimes building to crescendos that made the windows vibrate. Then, gradually, they began to retreat. The music faded, the lights dimmed, and one by one they moved away from the office and back toward the woods. The last one lingered for a moment outside the front window, its glow barely visible through the curtain, before finally disappearing into the darkness. 4:30 a.m. I checked my watch and confirmed the time. According to Rule 4, I could look outside now, but I didn't. I sat there for another few minutes, listening to the silence and trying to process what had just happened. When I finally opened the curtains, everything looked normal. The security lights cast their usual harsh glow over empty rides and walkways. The woods were dark and still. There was no sign that anything unusual had occurred. But I could still hear echoes of that music in my head, and I knew I'd never forget the beauty of those lights. At 5:30 a.m., I was slumped over the desk, my head resting on my arms. The paperwork was done, the lights in the woods had been gone for an hour, and I figured I had maybe 30 minutes before Walter showed up to end this nightmare shift. My eyes burned from staying awake all night, and every muscle in my body ached from the constant tension. That's when I heard the footsteps, soft, light steps on the gravel outside. Not the heavy boots Walter wore, and definitely not the deliberate pacing from earlier. These sounded different, smaller, quicker. I lifted my head and checked my watch. 5:32 a.m. The footsteps stopped right outside the front door. I sat up straighter, my heart starting to pound again just when I thought I was done with scares for the night. The door handle turned slowly, and the door swung open without a knock, without any warning at all. A kid walked in. He looked about 8 years old, maybe 9. Brown hair that needed a comb, wearing a red t-shirt and blue jeans that looked normal enough, not torn or dirty like you'd expect from someone who'd been lost in the woods all night. His sneakers were white with grass stains on the sides. He had that pale, tired look kids get when they've been crying, but his eyes were dry now. "Excuse me," he said, his voice small and polite. "I'm lost. Can you help me find my parents?" Every alarm bell in my head went off at once. Rule 5. If a child enters claiming to be lost, immediately call 911. Don't let the child leave until police arrive. I reached for the phone on the desk, keeping my eyes on the kid. "Sure, I can help you. What's your name?" "Tommy," he said, taking a step closer to the desk. "Tommy Patterson. My mom and dad brought me to the park yesterday, but I got separated from them. I've been looking all night." My hand found the phone receiver. The park had been closed for hours before my shift even started. No way this kid had been here since yesterday. Not unless something very wrong was happening. "Okay, Tommy. I'm going to call some people who can help find your parents, all right?" I started dialing 911, but the kid's whole demeanor changed instantly. "No," he said, his voice sharp and much louder. "Don't call anyone. I just need you to help me look for them." I kept dialing. "It's okay, Tommy. The police are really good at finding missing people. They'll help us locate your mom and dad." "Hang up the phone!" The kid's voice cracked, and he moved toward the desk with his hands clenched into fists. "Please, just hang up. You don't understand." The emergency operator picked up. 911, what's your emergency?" "This is Alexander Harrison at Wildwood Amusement Park," I said, watching Tommy's face go white. "I have a lost child here who needs assistance." Tommy started pacing back and forth in front of the desk, his movements jerky and agitated. "You shouldn't have done that," he kept saying. "You shouldn't have called them. They're going to take me away." "Can you describe the child?" the operator asked. "Male, approximately 8 years old, brown hair, wearing a red shirt and blue jeans. Says his name is Tommy Patterson." The kid stopped pacing and stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not angry anymore, but something else. Something that made my skin crawl. "Officers are en route," the operator said. "Keep the child calm and don't let them leave the premises." "Understood. Thank you." I hung up and looked at Tommy, who had moved to the window facing the carousel. He was examining the curtains I'd closed earlier, running his small fingers along the edges like he was testing how well they were sealed. "Tommy, why don't you sit down? The police will be here soon, and they'll help us find your parents." He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the side window and did the same thing, checking the curtains, testing the fabric. Then he moved to the back window, the one where the knocking had come from during Rule 3. "These are closed really tight," he said, his voice oddly flat. "Why did you close all the windows?" "Just keeping the office secure," I said, standing up slowly. The kid was making me nervous with his behavior, the way he was examining everything like he was looking for weak spots. Tommy moved to the front door and tested the handle, pushing it open a few inches before letting it swing shut. "This doesn't lock from the inside," he observed. "Tommy, come away from the door. The police officers will need to come in when they get here." He turned to look at me, and for just a second, his face looked different, older. The expression in his eyes wasn't what you'd expect from a scared, lost 8-year-old. It was calculating. "How long until they arrive?" he asked. "Soon, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Tommy nodded and went back to pacing, but now his movements were more purposeful. He walked the perimeter of the small office, checking each window again, testing the door handle twice more, even examining the filing cabinets like he was memorizing the layout. "Tommy, are you feeling okay? Do you need some water or anything?" "I'm fine," he said without looking at me. "Just thinking." The way he said it made my stomach turn. Kids didn't usually say they were just thinking in that tone. It sounded too adult, too deliberate. I stayed standing behind the desk, keeping the furniture between us. Something about this whole situation felt wrong, beyond just the obvious weirdness of a kid showing up at 5:30 in the morning. The way he'd reacted to the phone call, the way he was examining the office like he was planning something, none of it felt like normal lost child behavior. Tommy stopped pacing and stood in the center of the room, looking directly at me. "You followed all the rules tonight, didn't you?" My blood went cold. "What did you say?" "The rules. The ones Walter gave you. You followed them exactly." I didn't answer. How could this kid possibly know about the rules? "That's why I'm here," Tommy continued, his voice still in that flat, too adult tone. "Because you followed them. Because you did exactly what you were supposed to do." "I don't know what you're talking about." Tommy smiled, and it wasn't a kid's smile. "Rule 5. If a child enters claiming to be lost, immediately call 911. Don't let the child leave until police arrive." He recited it perfectly, word for word. I felt like I was going to throw up. "How do you know that?" "Because I've been here before," Tommy said. "Lots of times. With other people who worked the night shift. Some of them followed the rules. Some of them didn't." "What happened to the ones who didn't follow the rules?" Tommy's smile got wider. "They tried to help me find my parents." Before I could ask what that meant, I heard car doors slamming outside. Red and blue lights flashed through the tiny gaps in the curtains, painting the walls in alternating colors. Tommy's expression changed instantly back to that of a frightened child. "Please, don't let them take me," he said, his voice small and scared again. "I just want to find my mom and dad. The front door opened and 2 police officers entered. I recognized them immediately. Officer Ramirez and Officer Mitchell, the same 2 who'd responded to calls here before, according to what Walter had implied. They moved with the same practiced efficiency I'd seen in their previous visits, like they'd done this exact thing many times. "Alexander Harrison?" Officer Ramirez asked, though he was looking directly at Tommy. "Yes, that's me. This is Tommy Patterson. He says he's lost." Officer Mitchell was already moving toward Tommy with something in his hands, restraints of some kind, but not regular handcuffs. They looked more like the specialized equipment you'd use for someone having a medical emergency. "Tommy," Officer Ramirez said in a calm, professional voice, "we're here to help you get back where you belong." "I don't want to go," Tommy said, backing toward the corner of the office. "I just want to find my parents." "I know," Officer Mitchell said, approaching slowly. "But you can't stay here. You know that." Tommy looked at me with those 2 old eyes. "Tell them I can stay with you. Tell them you'll help me look for my mom and dad." I remembered Walter's warning about following the rules exactly. "I'm sorry, Tommy. The officers know what's best." Something flickered across Tommy's face. Disappointment, maybe, or anger. But he didn't resist when Officer Mitchell reached him. The restraints went on quickly and efficiently, some kind of soft cuffs that looked more medical than criminal. "Is he okay?" I asked as they led Tommy toward the door. "He'll be fine," Officer Ramirez said. "This happens sometimes. Kids get confused, end up places they shouldn't be." Tommy looked back at me as they reached the door. "See you next time, Alexander," he said in that flat, adult voice. The officers exchanged a glance but didn't comment. They led Tommy outside to their patrol car, and I watched through the window gap as they put him in the back seat. The red and blue lights were still flashing, casting everything in that eerie, shifting glow. Officer Ramirez came back to the door. "You did the right thing calling us immediately," he said. "Some people try to handle these situations themselves. That never works out well. What exactly was that situation?" "Nothing you need to worry about," he said. "Just keep following whatever protocols your supervisor gave you. They're there for a reason." He left without any further explanation, and I watched the patrol car drive away down the gravel road. The red and blue lights disappeared into the distance, leaving me alone in the office with the morning light starting to creep through the curtain gaps. I sat back down at the desk and checked my watch. 5:58 a.m. Walter would be here soon to end my shift, and I'd survived all 5 rules, but Tommy's words kept echoing in my head. "See you next time, Alexander." Like this wasn't over, like he'd be back. I pulled out the laminated rule sheet and read Rule 5 again. If child enters claiming to be lost, immediately call 911. Don't let child leave until police arrive. The rule had worked exactly as intended. The police had come. They'd handled the situation with obvious experience, and they'd removed Tommy from the premises. But the way Tommy had known about the rules, the way he'd recited Rule 5 word for word, the way the officers had been so prepared with specialized restraints, it all suggested this wasn't just a random lost child situation. This was something that happened regularly, something the rules and the police response were specifically designed to handle. I folded the rule sheet and put it back in my shirt pocket, then started organizing the paperwork I'd completed throughout the night. In a few minutes, Walter would walk through that door, ask if I'd followed all the rules, and I'd be able to say yes. I'd survived my first overnight shift at Wildwood Amusement Park, but as I stacked the maintenance forms and supply requests, I couldn't shake the feeling that Tommy would be back. Maybe not tomorrow night, maybe not next week, but eventually. And next time, I'd have to follow Rule 5 again, make the same phone call, watch the same officers take him away with the same specialized equipment. The morning light was getting stronger now, filtering through the curtains and making the office feel almost normal again. Almost like a regular workplace where regular maintenance happened and nothing supernatural or dangerous ever occurred. But I knew better now. The rules weren't suggestions or pranks or elaborate hazing rituals. They were survival instructions, tested and refined by previous employees who'd learned the hard way what happened when you didn't follow them exactly. I heard gravel crunching outside and checked my watch. 6 a.m. exactly. Walter's truck door slammed and his heavy footsteps approached the office. The gravel crunched under tires at exactly 6 a.m. I looked up from the desk where I'd been sitting for the past hour, staring at the laminated rule sheet and trying to process what I'd just lived through. Walter's truck door slammed shut with that heavy sound old pickups make, and his boots started their familiar trudge toward the office. He knocked twice before entering, a courtesy he hadn't bothered with yesterday evening. The door swung open, and Walter stepped inside, looking exactly the same as when he'd left me here 10 hours ago. Same faded supervisor jacket, same weathered face, same ring of keys jangling from his belt. But his eyes went straight to the windows, checking that all the curtains were still drawn tight. "Morning," he said, closing the door behind him. His voice was neutral, giving nothing away. I stood up from the desk chair, my legs stiff from sitting too long. "Morning." Walter's gaze swept the office methodically, the closed curtains, the completed paperwork stacked neatly on the desk, the coffee mug I'd been nursing for the past 2 hours. He was looking for signs, I realized. Evidence of whether I'd made it through the night intact. "Everything go all right?" he asked. But the way he said it made it clear this wasn't small talk. This was an inspection. "Yeah." I picked up the laminated sheet from the desk, holding it between us like proof. "I followed all 5 rules, exactly like you said." Walter's eyes fixed on the rule sheet, then moved back to my face. He was studying me the way you'd examine a car after a long road trip, checking for damage. "All 5? Everyone." I could hear the exhaustion in my own voice. Stayed out of the woods between 1 and 5. Didn't look at the carousel during the 15 minutes. Ignored the knocking at 3. Kept the blinds closed at 4. Called 911 when the kid showed up. Something shifted in Walter's expression at that last part. Not surprise, more like confirmation of something he'd been expecting. "Kid came by, did he?" "Tommy Patterson said he was lost." I set the rule sheet back on the desk. "Officers Ramirez and Mitchell picked him up around 5:30. Walter nodded slowly like this was all routine information. "Good. You called right away?" Soon as he walked in the door. "Didn't try to help him find his parents yourself?" "No." The memory of Tommy's adult voice saying, "See you next time," made my skin crawl. Followed the rule exactly. Walter studied my face for another long moment, then seemed to reach some kind of decision. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and he pulled his keys from his belt. "All right then, you can head home." That was it. No debriefing, no explanation of what I'd just survived, no acknowledgement that the night had been anything other than a standard maintenance shift. He moved to the filing cabinet and started pulling out folders like this was any other morning. I grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair. "Same time tomorrow night?" 8 p.m. sharp. Walter didn't look up from his paperwork. "Don't be late." I walked to the door, then stopped with my hand on the handle. "Walter?" "Yeah?" "How many people worked this shift before me?" He finally looked up, and for just a second I saw something in his eyes that might have been sadness, or maybe just fatigue. "Enough," he said. "Get some sleep, Harrison. You'll need it." The morning air hit me like a slap after 10 hours in that stuffy office. The park looked completely different in daylight, just a rundown collection of old rides and peeling paint. Nothing supernatural about it. The carousel horses were frozen in their galloping poses, looking shabby and harmless under the gray October sky. I walked to my Civic, fishing the keys out of my pocket. My hands were steadier now than they'd been all night, but I could still feel the adrenaline working its way out of my system. The car started on the second try, and I pulled out of the gravel lot onto the 2-lane road that led back to town. The drive home gave me 20 minutes to think, and that's when it really hit me. This wasn't some elaborate hazing ritual or psychological test. The rules weren't Walter's idea of a joke. Everything that had happened, the sounds in the woods, the figure on the carousel, the knocking at the windows, the lights, the kid who knew things no 8-year-old should know. All of it was real. The rules had kept me alive. Each rule corresponded to something that happened every single night. Something that killed people who didn't know how to handle it. The woods between 1 and 5 a.m. weren't just off limits. They were hunting grounds. The carousel figure wasn't a hallucination. It was something that would do worse than kill you if you looked directly at it. The thing knocking at the windows wasn't trying to get help. It was trying to get in. The lights in the woods weren't beautiful. They were bait. And Tommy Patterson wasn't a lost child. He was something else entirely. Something the police had to handle with special restraints. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex and sat there with the engine running, staring at the dashboard. The laminated rule sheet was still in my shirt pocket, and I could feel it pressing against my chest like a weight. $22 an hour. That's what Walter was paying me to survive supernatural encounters that had probably killed God knows how many people before someone figured out the pattern. How many night shift workers had there been before me? How many had tried to help the sounds in the woods, or looked directly at the carousel, or opened the door at 3 a.m., or investigated those lights? How many had tried to help Tommy find his parents instead of calling the cops? Walter's words echoed in my head. Enough. I turned off the engine and sat in the silence of my car. The October morning was getting brighter. Normal people starting their normal days, going to normal jobs where the biggest danger was maybe a paper cut or spilled coffee. Meanwhile, I was sitting here trying to process the fact that I'd just survived a night that could have killed me in at least 5 different ways. The worst part was knowing I had to go back. Rent was still due in 4 days. I still had $43 to my name. The job paid better than anything else I could find, and Walter hadn't exactly been beating down doors to hire people. There was probably a reason for that. I pulled the rule sheet out of my pocket and unfolded it, reading through the 5 numbered points again. They looked so simple on paper, so straightforward. Don't do this. Don't do that. Call the police if this happens. But living through them was something else entirely. The sounds in the woods had been terrifying enough, but the carousel figure, the knocking, the lights, each one had tested my willpower in a different way. And Tommy had been the worst of all, because he'd looked so genuinely helpless until the moment he'd revealed what he really was. How long could I keep this up? How many nights could I follow these rules perfectly before exhaustion or fear or simple human curiosity made me slip up? Because that's all it would take. One mistake, one moment of weakness, one time I looked when I shouldn't, or opened a door I should keep closed. I folded the rule sheet and put it back in my pocket, then got out of the car and walked toward my apartment building. The morning felt surreal after the night I just had, like I was moving through someone else's life. Other tenants were leaving for work, checking their phones, complaining about traffic. Normal problems, normal fears. I climbed the stairs to my second-floor apartment and unlocked the door. The place looked exactly the same as when I'd left it yesterday evening. Unmade bed, dishes in the sink, bills stacked on the kitchen counter. But I felt like a different person walking into it. 10 hours ago, I'd thought the worst thing that could happen to me was getting evicted. Now I knew there were much worse fates than being homeless. I sat down on my couch and stared at the wall, the rule sheet still burning a hole in my pocket. Tomorrow night, I'd have to do it all over again. And the night after that. And the night after that, until I either saved enough money to find something else or made the kind of mistake that meant I wouldn't be coming home at all. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. Normal sounds, safe sounds. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine going back to that office tomorrow night, sitting at that desk while things moved in the woods and knocked on the windows and tried to lure me into breaking the rules that kept me breathing. I wasn't sure I could do it, but I wasn't sure I had a choice.